welcome you all, and you are very welcome. I don't have to ask, if I normally have to do, how many students are here, because I can see, and young filmmakers, this is wonderful to see you. I've had occasions here in the past which has been disappointing. This is great to see you here, and I know Roger will appreciate it as much as I do. Anyway, welcome to this festival, which is the oldest in the world, devoted to cinematography. I have to say, first of all, how grateful I am to the Manaki film professionals for continuing for 39 years this love of cinematography and love of cinematographers. It's something which keeps us going. We are a very special breed of people, and we're generous. Our profession is generous, and we're going to see a lot of generosity today. Having said that, I also would like to say something about the reason why I was here. I was here because I was president of Imago. Imago we have tomorrow a fourth conference of Balkan societies. I know you're all from the Balkans, but I just want to say this, that it's very important. It's important for the societies and for your working together in collaboration and cooperation and friendship, that we have an umbrella organization which brings you all in. I talked to Tamis Harkovsky yesterday. He said, no, unfortunately, he can't be here today, but I said, are we wasting our time? He said, no, you're not wasting your time. You're bringing people together. And that encouraged me a lot. And thank you for coming today. Occasionally, cinematographers occasionally, you know, we're sometimes behind the scenes, and now and again an individual arises who puts us on a different plane, and the plane is to do with respect. I put the word respect. It's respect for the profession, and we've had Vilmos Sigmund here. We've had great cinematographers who are teachers, and I'm very honoured and privileged to be here with Roger today, because he is a man who has commanded respect from students. He has, a few of you, I asked earlier, have been to his website. And if the questions are not answered today, please go to the www, this is like an advertisement, but it's meant, www.rogerdeakins.com, rogerdeakins.com, and ask the questions. I ask, as I always do every year, for sensible questions, intelligent questions, and then you'll get intelligent answers. Thank you very much. Now, so I was saying that Roger's here. I'm not going to talk any longer. My voice is going, as you can probably hear. We have great cinematographers here, Christian Berger here, Ryan is here, and we have all of whom are wonderful award winners in their own right. And it's lovely to see you all here anyway. Without much ado, let's start, should we, at the beginning. And I'm going to ask Roger how he came into the profession and how the development of the earlier years.
Yeah, I mean, in a way it's by chance. I mean, when I was a kid, I love movies. I'm from a very small town in the southwest of England, so I'm not connected to the film business. And my father was a building contractor, so you know it was kind of unlikely for me at that period, I think, to be doing what I'm doing now. But there was a little film society in Torquay where I was brought up, and in the winters there wasn't much to do, so I used to go and watch the movies in the film society, you know. And I used to, it was in the days where you could get a 16mm print of films that were coming out, you know. I remember Alphaville and Last Year of Marienbad and films like this, which really kind of excited me about film, but I never kind of considered it a possibility that I would be working in film one day. And you know, I went to art college, as you do when you don't know what you want to do. And at art college, a friend of mine I basically discovered still photography. And then a friend of mine at our college talked about a National Film School opening up. And so I just took a chance and applied to the National Film School and didn't get in. But they did tell me that the second year that if I reapplied, I would get in. Or they led me to believe I would get in. So I was lucky enough to get in the National Film School, and that really changed my life. That's how I got into the film industry.
Well, tell us then, from the film industry, your decade, what's your life in documentaries, and as one of the few documentaries I remember, it's not on again. Yeah, sorry, thanks. Is that on?
Yeah. I'm not technologically minded, but that's on.
Okay, it's on, okay. One of the few was a documentary. Sorry, I'm not technically minded. Anyway, I was around the world with Ridgway. I remember it, watching it, and it rather intrigues me because a cinematographer who gave a similar talk here several years ago, Chris Mendes, was invited to do that, and he gave me a few tips about the innovative nature of Roger and the way in which he used the necessity of the difficulties of filming. Now, around the world in 80 days, he can tell you about it. I'm talking too much, but I want you to tell us, please, about the challenges that faced and how you overcame them.
Yeah, well, I got to owe Chris for that. I don't know if that's good or bad, but when I left the film school, Chris Mendes was like for his documentary work. You know, obviously did features later, but so I went to see him, showed him the work I'd been doing at the film school, and I think he was kind of impressed. And so when he was offered this documentary around the world about the round the world yacht race, which he turned down quite sensibly, he recommended me. Well, actually, I don't know if that was good or bad, but anyway, so I went on this yacht race for like 9 months, and had to train to be a member of the crew, and then made a film not about yacht racing so much as about what it was like for everybody to be in confinement in a sort of like difficult situation. So that was my first big break really in documentaries, and I sort of owe that to Chris really. He was a bit annoyed because I actually took his camera when I went on that job.
But you had the challenge of such challenges as how do you power the batteries for 9 months in a boat with possible, and also I'd like to tell us about the people and the difficulties of getting on with people and how you might have learned something from that.
Well, yeah, obviously in 9 months with 3 stops, and it's like varied, it was between 10 and 12 people on a 55-foot boat. It's kind of, you know, the personal pressures are kind of quite intense at times, but yeah, there was the technical challenges of, well, I was shooting them with an NPR 16mm film. It's not like today. How do you power it? You know, so it was, it was very early solar panels then that would charge, and I worked with this guy developing these 16mm camera batteries that we could charge off this very prototype solar panel we had, and I made rain deflectors out of a film can so that I could shoot on deck in the storms, and yeah, we had a lot of fun. I made some lights that I could run off 12 volt that were in the cabin, so I could put them on at times. And again, all that had to be powered by the batteries charged by the solar panels. Yeah.
One of your big breaks, Ben, was working with a young director called Michael Radford. Tell us how that came about and how it developed.
Yeah, well, I did documentaries quite a number of years, various things, some for the same television company that did the Round the World race. And again, I did a film in Eritrea with the guerrillas in Eritrea when they were fighting for independence. And that was another film that Chris turned down, which is kind of interesting. But, and then, you know, Mike Radford had been at the National Film School. He'd been in the first year's intake at the National Film School, so I didn't know him very well, but he kind of knew my work. So I did shoot some documentaries for him, and then he got a chance to do his first feature film called Another Time, Another Place. And he asked me to do it. By then I'd done a TV series, actually. I'd done a TV series that he'd seen. So I had a little bit more experience in drama. I don't think he would have asked me if I'd just done documentaries. So we did Another Time, Another Place, and that showed at the Cannes Film Festival, and the actress in it won the prize there, and I think the film won some prize. But a producer came up to Mike at that festival and said, "What do you want to do next?" And Mike had always toyed with the idea of making a film about 1984, but he didn't have a script or anything. But he said, "Oh, well, I'd really like to make a film in 1984." And this producer said, "Okay, we'll do it." so suddenly, the two of us went for this fairly small film that we shot in Scotland, Another Time, Another Place, to making a film in 1984, which was like, for me, it was like, whoa, a dream come true, you know.
To carry on with the 1984 experience, you used, as I understand it, a process called bleach bypass in order to desaturate the colors. That came about because of what?
Well, we wanted to shoot the film in black and white, but I mean, you wouldn't get finance. It was being financed by Virgin Records at the time, and they were trying to get into financing films, but they wouldn't allow us to shoot in black and white. I can understand why. So Mike wanted to he'd heard about, I think he'd heard about experiments in doing something with a negative anyway. The lab that I was using in London did some tests, and we found this bleach bypass process that we could do on the print, but it meant every print of the film had to be done through this process, which in essence left the silver in the print. So you got a very intense black. The only problem was that it leaves the silver in, and when it's in the projection system, the heat builds up in the projector. So the first time we showed the film, the projector kind of blew up because it overheated. So after that, we had to make sure they tested all the projectors before they showed the films. But it was all right, actually. That was the only time it happened, so it might have been an anomaly. But it wasn't done like now. You do it like, I mean, I've done it previously on Jesse James. We were talking about that. I mean, I did a partial bleach bypass on Jesse James, but that was done on the negative. But this was done on the print, you know, which was kind of difficult.
Was that a pioneering experience using that process?
As I understand it, it was the first feature film that used that process for the whole film. I think some people had toyed with it, you know, but I don't think another feature film had used that process. Okay. I mean, Keizu Miyagawa in Japan had a process called silver tint that he used on a couple of his last films, I believe. And I tried to find out how he did it. And he used to be a chemist. He used to work at a lab before he became cinematographer with, you know, Kurosawa and Michiguchi and everybody. And but he never let anybody. He went to his grave without telling anybody how he did it, because he did it himself because he was a chemist. Damn.
Looking back, incidentally, we've got about 12, 13 clips of Roger's films to see in the next 2 hours, maybe 2.25 hours, who knows. But
have to be.
We also have this kind of discussion between clips. If there's anything you don't really understand, please ask, because that's what Roger's here for, to answer your questions as well as to impart the knowledge that he has. I just asked the question of this, that these early days that you and other great cinematographers had in Britain, I think that there's something quite, for the generation of British cinematographers, or couple of generations, the documentary experience has made them into what they are as great cinematographers. What is your opinion of that, as being peculiar to me?
I think it's interesting. Oh, no, did it? I say man now. It's interesting getting to know other cinematographers since being in America more than anything at the ASC, and it's interesting how people came to it in such different ways. I mean, I remember talking to Jack Green one day, and he said, yeah, he was assistant barber in San Francisco or something, in Oakland, and a friend of his was doing a documentary. And he said, would you mind coming and assisting me on this documentary? And that led to him, Jack Green, being a Eastwood cinematographer for many years. So, everybody gets to it in a different way. But for me, yes, I think documentaries it's a great way of training your eye, improving your eye, the way you see, getting an intuitive sense of where to be, where to put the camera, and what's going to happen next. The sort of documentaries I shot were, the verite kind of thing, where you're following a process. You're not setting up something with the ability to do take two. So you needed to develop a kind of second sense, really. That was the most important thing, I think.
I think we'll have a look at our first clip, please. This is from 1984. It was actually shot in 1984, which isn't surprising, but it's... what was the relevance of it to you as a film?
It gets more relevant every day, I'm sad to say.
Okay, let's have a look at that, please. Thank you very much.
In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society on the brink of starvation.
That was a time before special effects were not invented, but special effects were as usable as they were. But tell us how it came about to create the images there.
Yeah, you're right. Everything in the film is done in camera. There's not one shot. There's not one shot that was done blue screen, and there's nothing that's got any CG effects on it, obviously, because that didn't come till much later. All the projections done in camera, and the big hate rally there. Those two big screens were just done with kind of a standard cinema projection process, but they were big arc projectors that we had on towers. There were two arc projectors, and we put the towers about 75 feet from the screens, which are about 45 feet screens, and the screens were a special paint material that was semi-silvered. So it wasn't a front projection material, but it wasn't a normal cinema screen. So we got a bit higher light level, because then it was 100 ASA stock, and I was shooting absolutely wide open. And so that was, for the big situations, we did that kind of projection. For a lot of the interior sets, we did a back projection process. So the set always had to be built in such a situation we could put a projector behind that wall that had the screen on it and project it. And then everything that was being projected, and then we used, sometimes for the smaller televisions, we actually used old televisions. And everything that had was played back, we rephotographed off a television, but we rephotographed the image as a smaller part of the screen of the television so that we could get the texture and the scan lines when it was projected back on a film projector. So it was quite a lot of testing to do that, but it was quite a lot of fun. Oh, and there was one shot in the film, or I think the same shot's used twice. It's a landscape outside a city, and there's a big metal structure of it with a screen on it, and that was a glass shot, and we would put the glass in front of the camera. I'm sure people know about it, but nobody does it now, obviously. You put the glass at 45 degrees to the camera, and then a really skilled painter paints in the structure of that was going to hold the screen, and he also painted in some brutalistic buildings in the background. And then we got a little projector, another arc projector, that would fill in where the screen was on that piece of glass to put the image there. So it's all done in camera. Of course, now it's like you just press a button, and but which is a pity, because that was a lot of fun, really. But I was really glad, retrospectively, I was really glad that my career started on the sort of cusp of the digital revolution, and I actually got to do that on a film, because I'd always worshipped, the cameramen like, Jerry Fisher, Freddie Francis, and Dougie Slocum, and that, and I heard all the ways that they would do these things. Jack Cardiff and what he did on films like Black Narcissus and all that with Michael Powell, and I thought, oh, it's such a great thing that I just had the chance on one film to do all these little tricks. It was great.
This happened to be Freddie Francis' favourite festival.
Yeah, no, I bet. Yeah,
wonderful. Anyway, but from those documentary days, and also from this particular film, the importance of making the artists at home. And you told me yesterday a story which I think it shows that the cinematographer can be such an important, unless the artist is at ease, he ain't going to perform. So tell us the story. In this film we had Richard Burton, who happened to be Welsh, fortunately for him. And tell us the story that happened to you.
well, I do think it's a huge part of a cinematographer's job is to give the space to the actors to do their work, because if they can't do their work, you haven't got a film, if you haven't got a character, if you haven't a believable character. So it's no use how pretty your lighting or whatever, it's irrelevant to actually giving the space to the performer. And we were like 2 days into shooting with Richard Burton, and John Hurt was on it, obviously, but Richard Burton had played big, basically the big brother, or the authority figure anyway. And the second day, he asked the AD to come round the crew and suggest everybody to come to outside his trailer at the end of the shoot day. And of course, we all thought we were in for a bollocking, actually. We all thought, we were so nervous. Anyway, we were all standing around. It wasn't a big crew, it was like 120 people probably, but he came out this trailer, which was a tiny little trailer in those days, but he came out, he said, I just want to thank you all for one of the nicest days shooting I've ever had. He said, when I came on set and saw so many fresh young faces, I was so nervous. He said, but you made me feel so welcome, and he said something like, I'm so proud to be working on a film like this at this point in my life. And I'm moved now by thinking about it. It was just like really a wonderful moment. And part of that was, I've always thought that it's so important that you create the space, and it's not just a cinematographer, but it's his whole crew and everybody around him, anybody that works the set. It's really about the actors,
Sadly, Richard Burton died. That was his last film he was ever to make. Anyway, the success of 1984 really was, I suppose, an introduction to acceptability in America, and a big step for you.
No, actually, it wasn't that much of a success. It certainly financially wasn't a success because Virgin never made a movie after it. Sorry about that. But I think over the years it's kind of gained more repute, really, because I have it here. I asked Nigel for it to be on this reel because it's a personal favourite of mine. I don't know if I'd like a film like that now, and I wish I would, because I think I look at it and think it's kind of crude, but it really fits the piece, and I think the film is so true to its subject and the nature of what Orwell was talking about. Anyway, yeah, I mean, obviously it was the first large film I did, and a studio piece, so it did lead me to do other work after this, yeah. It did establish me, I suppose, as a cinematographer, yeah.
How did you make the decision to go and work in America? How did that come about?
Well, there wasn't much work in England. No, I mean, that's flippant, but at that time it wasn't. England was in a bad way. And I was starting to get offered a few films in America. I did a film in America called Long Walk Home, and then and I worked in America, part of Sid and Nancy was shot there. And then a few years later, I got a call from Joel and Ethan Coen,
Yep. But in order to give us an indication of what it's like to work with more difficult people than the Coens, tell us about your very first experience.
Well, a difficult experience?
A difficult one, yes. Air America was not a happy one. What happened to you?
Now you mention names. No, it wasn't. Air America was a big film, which really they were talking about as being a kind of MASH type ironic comedy, and it was about, guns for dogs, the CIA operatives and stuff in Laos, and but it ended up not being very good, a bit lightweight, and I was really the wrong person to have been on that film. I was there because of the producer, Dan Melnick. I wasn't there for any other reason. And, I operate the camera. I don't like working with multiple cameras. I don't particularly like zoom lenses, unless it's a particular shot where you're kind of focusing with using a zoom. So I was the wrong person to work with that particular director. But, I got through the film and then decided to retire from the film industry afterwards. No, in seriousness, I decided I didn't really want to do that kind of film anymore, so I kind of pulled back a little bit from the film industry, I thought, and then I got a call from Joel and Ethan Coen, yeah, so changed again for me,
And John and Ethan Coen asked you, before they took you on, something about your work practices.
Joel said to me years later, the first film I did with him was Button Fink, after we were pretty good friends. Years later he said, when they were thinking of using me, they rang up this director from Air America and asked him all the questions, and the director said, no, he likes single camera, he operates himself, he doesn't like zoom lenses. And Joel said, every time he said something disparaging of you, he said, we went, tick, tick, tick. Just so, the thing is, you don't always fit with everybody. I mean, it's not to say one way is right and another way is wrong. It's like you don't always fit together. That's just, as people, you don't always fit together. So there we go.
We'll show shortly a clip from the Shawshank Redemption. But before we do, there's a question I was asked by one of the technicians here this morning, which would perhaps be easier for you to explain prior to seeing the clip, and that is how you did the first shot. I mean, those were not the days long before drones. But tell us how the first shot came about first.
The helicopter shot, going to the prison.
Yes.
We did it very, very quickly because there was a sort of rainstorm coming in, and that would have ruined the housing on the It was a West Cam shot on a helicopter. So we did a couple of rehearsals. We had it in mind. We kind of, I don't know if we storyboarded it, but we talked about the shot in mind. So we knew what we wanted. Ron Goodman was the helicopter pilot. Who's one of like the best in the world. And we discussed the shot, and we just developed it through a couple of rehearsals, and there it was. It was nothing that complicated, really.
Right, we'll look at the clip from the Shawshank Redemption, please. Well, that is many people's favourite Roger Deakins film, but it's not your favourite. And tell us why it's not your favourite.
Well, I wouldn't say it's not my favourite, but kind of, yeah, if people talk about it kind of really a bit more than I'd like, I suppose. No, I like the film. I remember thinking when we started it, it would be a little bit more realistic. I mean, it's a little poetic for me. I would have done something more brutal, but maybe it's a little bit more brutal than it would have been if I hadn't been on it anyway. So who knows? You know, you don't know. No, I like it. I mean, it's what I was saying to somebody earlier. You know, when you shoot a film, you're disappointed. Sometimes it's not exactly everything you wanted it to be, and you watch it, you know, a year later or 5 years later, and it kind of gets better. You know, so looking at the clip, I think, well, wasn't that bad, was it? You know, going back to that shot you're talking about, I was just looking at, you know, it's the sort of thing where you have the idea that helicopters coming over the thing, and that, you know, and the people coming out, you come around and see the bus coming in. But there was one little thing, the flag. And I remember we looked at one of the playbacks, and I said to Ron, why don't you try and get as near as you can to the flag, because you go by it, they can put the sound, you know, and it's a little thing, but those little things that you make on the day, you know, that really bring.
You certainly learned how to get away from a soft film by making quite violent films, and practically the rest of the Coens certainly learned from the Coens. So we'll talk about the next film you made, which I like very much. I like them all, but Fargo. Tell us about Fargo, how that came about.
Well, that was the third film I did with Joel and Ethan, and we'd just done a film with Tim, actually, Tim Robbins, called Hudsucker Proxy, which was kind of a period kind of fairy tale in a way. It was a love story, and it was quite a big budget, involved a lot of big sets and a lot of huge amount of lighting. And the film came out, and it was probably a flop, really, and not very successful anyway. And Joel and Ethan came to me sometime later and said they had this very small film that I wouldn't be interested in, but they were going to do this film set in Fargo, and it was going to be very low budget. And I said, no, I'm there, you know, I'm going to be there. And so, yeah, it's the lowest budget film I think they've ever done. Yeah, it was very little money, but it was one of the best experiences. And the whole concept of the film was, it was like fake news. It was like a story. It was like a docudrama. They wanted it to say, this is a true story. There's a title card at the beginning that says, this is a true story. It's actually an amalgam and a number of different things. But so they wanted to shoot it in a slightly more documentary way, in a bit more of an observational way. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you used longer lenses in that film than subsequently seen in most of your films. That was part of the observational aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it was slightly longer lenses, but I mean, to some people they won't be long lenses. They might still be wide lenses. I mean, I would be talking about a 40 and a 35 rather than a 32 and a 27. So it's not like I'm suddenly, you know, shooting on 100 mil or something. But yeah, there's just that more. It was. I mean, Joel actually mentioned Ken Loach, and that slightly more observational kind of quality without moving the camera so much, you know.
Yes. What was it like working with Frances McDormand at the time?
Oh, I mean, she's great. I mean, she's great. Obviously, that was a great part for her, you know.
Yes.
Great actress.
And you carry on using the bleach bypass for all these films?
No, I only ever used that on 1984.
That's the only one you ever use it
on? And a different process on Assassination Jesse James, but I've never used it on anything else.
I see. Okay. Right. Well, let's go on to another film, because time will obviously cut things down. But on the whole, working with Fargo was a nice experience.
Oh, no, it was brilliant. I mean, it was technical challenge because of the where we were shooting.
Yes.
The cold and, you know, and again, so it was kind of very low budget. So although we had storyboarded everything, in those days I would sit with Joel and Ethan and go through the storyboards together. You know, spend 4 or 5 weeks sometimes doing it. We did on Barton Fink and on Fargo as well. But even so, you know, a lot of the time you're making it up as you go along, and you're working very quickly and then saying, well, we don't need this shot because, you know, we basically play something on a 2-shot and you don't even shoot singles, you know, which is they're so great at because they cut their own material. They have a complete understanding of the rhythm of the film in their head. I mean, I was really struck when I first worked with them on Barton Fink. Later, when I saw the cut, I counted the number of shots that we'd shot that weren't in the film, and I counted, I think, 7. It was less than 2 hands anyway. And so there was nothing shot that wasn't used somewhere in the cut. And in those days, they would also only shoot, like if it was a conversation, they would only shoot the line they wanted for the 2-shot. They wouldn't run the whole scene on a 2-shot and then run the whole scene on a single. They would shoot this line and then go there and then go, you know? it was so efficient because they started on, you know, doing their own little films with no money and stuff.
So that, the Coen brothers, the storyboarding, everything, is that correct?
Yes.
They gave you, in your earlier films there with them, a discipline which they imposed upon you to some extent.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good example of just the variation of the approach, really, because Joel and Ethan are very methodical, and they make books in a way like a picture book. You can feel it in the quality of their work. It's very formal in a way. But at the same time, I was doing, you know, Sid and Nancy and films and later Jihad. You know, I'm just shooting the whole film handheld and basically shooting the rehearsal. So it's two totally different ways of approach, but that's what I love about the job, and especially operating, because it's always exciting. It's just so many different ways of getting to that end result, you know.
Yeah. I did notice that when I looked at Fargo, there was a separate operator's credit.
Yeah, well, in those days, the union insisted on the grade was filled, so there was an operator, yeah, but he never did anything. No, I mean, it's sad. I mean, actually, the operator on that was had been my focus puller for years. You know, but it's, yeah, that's gone, thankfully. I mean, when I started in England, there was a hell of a lot of resentment towards me. I mean, there was a hell of a lot of resentment back then for somebody coming out of film school and expecting to shoot a movie, because in those days, you work your way through the grades to become a cinematographer. You just didn't, you know, but times are different, thank God, you know.
How did you get a green card, and how was that a problem with your union membership at all? You just became a member, or how?
No, I became a member because I did Barton Fink, which was non-union, which was another reasons that Joel and Ethan asked me, and not an American cameraman. I did that, and then I did a film called Homicide in Baltimore, with David Mamet directed, and that was done under the New York local. So I joined the New York local, and then luckily for me, that year the New York local joined with the LA local to become 600, and I automatically got membership then of 600. So yeah, so it was kind of a lot of luck.
A lot of luck. We have to have a lot of luck in our lives.
Yeah, really.
Yes. Well, let's go and look at something of a lighter note, which is again Coen Brothers, and it's certainly one of the movies that made me laugh and smile and enjoy more than anything else, I think. Let's play Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, please.
We shot that baptism scene at a location called Alligator Lake. Alligator Lake.
Well, you survived.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Can you tell us a bit about the DI on this film?
Yeah, sure. It was basically certainly the first major movie that had used the process, and so it was a digital post, but it was done on what they call a spirit data cine. And so what you had the negative, the cut negative up, and you were rocking and rolling the cut negative and timing it as a digital file. But you couldn't, for some reason, I'm not very technical, for some reason you couldn't lay down that digital file until you'd completely timed the whole reel. So, you know, it took me about 11 weeks to time that film, and I was doing like different selects, like it's easy now to select a green, right? But then that was really hard. And some of the greens were different, so I had to do 2 or 3 different selects. And I'd say everything had to be kind of done as one piece before you laid it down as a final file. And I remember on a Thursday or Friday, we were doing this reel, and there was I don't know, power cut or something, or the machine it didn't save anyway. Something happened and we lost the whole week's work. It was like a kind of nightmare process. And of course, nowadays it's like, but why we did that is we tried to do it photochemically. I spent a number of weeks with a woman called Beverly Wood, a chemist at Deluxe Labs in LA, doing different overlays, trying to get rid of the green and trying to get this sort of more painterly sort of look. The guys wanted it to look like a faded postcard, you know, but we were shooting in Mississippi in summer and it's like so green. So we'd heard somebody was using this process on some sections of film, which was called Pleasantville, that came out later. And they did some sections this way. So we thought, well, if they're going to do it, we did some tests. It was okay, but it was really crazy. We thought by the time we came to the final post, the technology would have moved on enough that we could do this, you know. It moved on enough, but say it took about 11 weeks to do the whole film. It was kind of a nightmare. But I'm really actually quite pleased with the end result. And it's funny, I went back to it a few years ago to do another transfer for, you know, DVD or whatever. And the danger is to kind of make it too clean and crisp. But now I really like the fact that it's kind of falling apart in places. You get this pixelation, you know, and the edges they sort of fray. And it's kind of nice, really. I quite like it. It's one of those films that, retrospectively, I think it's better than I thought at the time.
So this in effect, this is your first use of digital technology?
Yes, it was just the post. Obviously, we were shooting film. Yeah, the whole thing, yeah.
Not the last, though?
No.
Anyway, tell us about the...
I can't even remember what year this was.
What year was that? Was 2000?
2000,
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't do...
That was young George Clooney.
Yeah, young George Clooney. Still young, isn't he? How's he doing?
Tell us about aspects of that. For example, you work with a costume designer. There are a lot of costumes involved in that, or the designer, designing it. Give us an indication of your involvement prior to
Yeah,
the film.
well, you work really closely with all those people. I mean, the production designer was Dennis Gassner, who he did most of the Coen Brothers films back then. I'm working with him again now, next year, and he did Bladerunner as well. So, you know, I've worked with him a lot over the years. And that's, you know, obviously it's a really important relationship. I mean, we first met on Barton Fink, and that was interesting because he was quite skeptical because I would change things. I have this habit of changing things on a set, you know, quite, you know, dramatically sometimes.
Yes.
And, you know, so it's a matter of building trust. So, you know, yeah.
Part of that team which you so eloquently talked about when receiving an Oscar.
Yeah.
And we all remember the the thing I remember about you getting that Oscar was not the speech so much, but the fact the audience standing, and that was really for respect for the profession of cinematography. And I thought that was the most fantastic thing about that night.
Yeah, it cost a lot of money though.
Did it? Well, you're well enough off to pay for it. Okay. All right. Anyway, let's go on to something different. Okay, another different film by the Coens, and that the last film was your first BAFTA nomination, wasn't it?
Ah, yeah, I don't remember.
I've forgotten to. Anyway, I had a feeling.
Oh, I think I won a BAFTA for that.
No, the BAFTA you won for.
BAFTA, I won for that, yeah.
And that was, yes.
Yeah.
That was that was the first BAFTA nomination, not yes, of course. Yeah, you probably won the BAFTA for it as well. You won three BAFTAs, I think, or maybe more. Anyway, so let's go on to The Man Who Was Not There, which is a film which you particularly like. And interesting enough, when getting these clips together and asking people around their favorite Deakins film, that came up more than any other. And it wasn't a film I knew very well, but tell us about making it.
Well, again, it was a very low budget movie, and we shot in LA, so the money didn't go that so far as we could have done somewhere else, but it was very much an LA story. And you know, there wasn't much money, it was purely because they wanted to shoot in black and white. In the end, we did a lot of tests. I did a lot of tests, and I tested shooting on color negative and printing it black and white. And I was kind of tending to go that way, but then I heard that the distributor in Europe wanted the option of doing a color version for their VHS or DVD or whatever it was back then. And so we had to shoot on color negative anyway. But I think it was preferable for this film because I didn't want, you know, black and white stocks haven't changed much for years and years and years, whereas, you know, the mid-speed 200 ASA color stock at this time was really pretty amazing and grainless and very smooth, and it was very good at picking up the mid-tones. So I decided to go that way because I wanted something, as I say, that didn't look like an old movie. Obviously, there's a lot of references to film noir and everything else, but I wanted it to look like a modern black and white movie that was just kind of, in a way, celebrating movies.
As we were getting further away from the color era, it was becoming more and more difficult to shoot in black and white, in effect. And in fact, myself, I had to shoot in color because the grain was better, more presentable. Also, the producers wanted it for the future use.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, let's go on. Well, we haven't seen that yet. We'll have a look at The Man Who Was Not There, please. Thank you.
just on the note of that color stock thing, I just realized, of course, it was good that we were shooting on color stock because all the car stuff's done blue screen. So you wouldn't have been able to do it if we were shooting black and white.
Okay.
There's you know, it was too long to show, but after, well, I love the specificity, what there is, the word is, Joel and Ethan, they really know about the timing, what they want out of something. When we were storyboarding this, they knew the whole feeling of, and Ed brings, you know, the wife back and puts her to bed and the phone rings, and then he's telling this story to the audience about how he met. So it's very kind of homage to a noir sort of movie, like, you know, an Alan Ladd movie or something. Then you know, the phone rings and he goes to meet his boss at night at this kind of clothes store, and murders his boss, and it's like very brutal, you know, and it's really nasty. And he comes back and he drives back, he gets back in the house and he sits back on the bed and then finishes the story about how he met his wife, Doris. And it's just so bloody brilliant. And for me, that is the best piece of filmmaking I've ever been involved with. It's absolutely perfect. And the use of the sound and the image and the laconic kind of voiceover, I don't know, anyway, that's always affected me now. I think it's really great.
It makes me more sorry that we didn't have time to show,
no, that would make people
show
watch
it all,
it, maybe,
because
you know.
that introduction is fantastic. It is a great scene, but it's so, in many ways, reminiscent of quite a few violent scenes, and we're going to see one shortly. But let's talk first of all. That was the end for the time. At that time of the period with the Coens, and you went on to work with a new exciting director called Sam Mendes. Anything you'd like to tell us about Sam and how you relate?
Well, only that, you know, one of my idols and somebody I got to know quite well was Conrad Hall. And Conrad Hall had shot Sam's previous films. So when I got a call from Sam Mendes to do a film with him, it was, yeah, well, I was very nervous. And I talked to Connie about Sam and how his process was. And on like Road to Perdition, Connie was kind of frustrated because they storyboarded the whole film. And Connie he used to be frustrated by storyboards. He felt they were too confining. I actually think they kind of lead to a release because you know exactly what you want. So you can get it in a different way if you want, as long as you stick to that game plan of knowing this is what you need to make this scene work. Anyway, so I had these conversations with him, and then I had this conversation with Sam, and it was like, yeah, I'm doing this film, I want it to be all handheld, and I want to shoot the rehearsals. And it was like totally the antithesis of what I was expecting. So anyway, that's this film.
And I suppose that from that experience, you I lost my train of thought for a moment, but it's about to do with that. It's to do with the fact that at that time, talking about used storyboards.
Yeah.
At that time, monitors had come in, and cinematographers traditionally at that time were very much against monitors, but you had a different opinion about monitors. So.
No, especially something like Jarhead, you know. I mean, again, also, you know, going between something like The Man Who Wasn't There that was very kind of formal and definitely constructed. I mean, we didn't do much that was made up in the day so much as just tried to work what we had planned. To going from that to a film like Jarhead, where literally I'm back to a sort of documentary reaction to a situation. So, you know, we would shoot a rehearsal, and then Sam and I would talk, and we could watch a playback and say, well, at this point, maybe you could move around the actor and get this bit. Or, you know what I mean? So you could evolve it by discussing the shot. I think that's a great use. I think a lot of cameramen were very against it at the beginning and still are. It's just the way it's used. It's like any technology, like Steadicam. If you just kind of waffle around with a Steadicam all day, you're not going to get much. If you spend all your time watching playback, you're not going to end up spending enough time shooting the actual film, you know.
Or trying to persuade the AD or where you want actors to be, whereas they can see exactly the problem on the monitor of where they want the action to be taking place.
It's led to a little bit of lack of trust in the operator. Because, you know, obviously when a director wasn't watching a shot, it has to ask the operator, how was that for you? And like when I'm first working with Joel and Ethan and a number of people, obviously there weren't monitors. And they would come up and, how was that? And he'd say, well, it was great, but this moment wasn't so good. And the director could say, okay, then we do it again, or I don't need that moment, that's okay, we should move on to something else. But now it's like you watch it back, watch it back, watch it back. 20 minutes, half an hour go by, and you think, well, no, the sun's going down, and you rush in to make the day. No, it's it's crazy.
Tell us about the magic of being an operator and your relationship with actors, because that is something quite special in many ways, is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love it. I mean, again, on this film, Jarhead, which we probably should watch, but it's like I was talking to Jake sometimes, you know, saying, just whispering, Jake, can you move to your left a bit? I'm going to come round now. Or can you lean down? You know, it's just little things. You've got to judge it with who the actor is and how they, you know, like on Shawshank with Morgan and Tim, I could do that. I mean, they were absolutely great. I mean, Morgan can, you know, do a take where he's kind of crying, emotional, and you know, the director says cut, and then he'll tell a really raucous story and then do another take. I mean, some of them are like that, but other actors are really intense, and you don't want to break that kind of concentration. It's just different people have different ways of working, you know.
And also the end of a scene, it's very often unspoken words, but just looks between the two of you, which tells them that it's okay.
Yes, very much so. As the operator, and I think it's true of any operator, not just me, as the actor would often look to the operator at the end of the take, you know, and you just go, not that, but you just nod, just, you know, you don't want to obviously, you know, take anything from the director or get in the director's way in that. But I think that reassurance is sometimes very good for an actor, yeah.
Which is always the problem about bringing an operator in who is not on the same wavelength as you are.
Yeah, there is that, you know. But I mean, you've got to think. I mean, I'm always nervous on the film, especially at the beginning. I'm like jelly, and you've got to realise that so's the actor. I mean, the actor's the one up on the screen, and the actor's got to find this character. And if they blow it, that's an important mistake, you know, or you know, that's them up there. But so everybody's nervous, and you've got to understand that. Yeah.
But you were getting to a point in your career where, I mean, I saw an interview with Benicio del Toro, who was saying that when he was asked to do a script, he looked at the producer, then he looked also at your name, and he thought that was one good reason to do that film. That was Sicario. Mm-hmm. Anyway, we'll go on.
You can show a bit of
Jarhead. We haven't talked about Jarhead at all.
We haven't shown it. Yeah.
Which is, I think, your favourite film. Tell us.
Well, it is. You know, a number of people said, you know, it's a war film and you don't see the war. But the point about it was it's a true story about this sniper being trained to kill and then never getting the chance to kill. It's like, yeah.
But there were tremendous difficulties in making it.
Well, not difficulties. I mean, just I mean, you're trying to create Kuwait and the oil fires, and you know, you're trying to create Iraq in the desert in California. It's quite a bit to do.
Okay, we'll have a little look at a scene from Jarhead, please. Tell us more about making Jarhead, please.
Yeah, obviously it was kind of good to have digital technology then, because obviously the backgrounds are put in. What we tried to do is shoot, what we did do was shoot oil fires, the mechanical effects supervisor put up in the desert. So we shot them day and night, and then they're put in the backgrounds of those shots. In the one that's the dust scene under the oil, it was actually shot in the desert, and I'm afraid we burnt these tires to, I think it was tires, to put up a cloud of black smoke to cut out the sun. So we shot under this, and we blacked out like, I don't know, 150 foot square of the desert with this black, and dug the trenches. And then they had cranes, and all the black oil coming down is actually vegetable oil, which is still pretty awful. And
It's raining KC! Oh shit, it's burning! It's burning! Give me some water! Fuck, it's burning!
all the background is actually with bright sunlight back there, but they took it out and replaced it. See that one big oil, not that one, I think it's one behind us is real. All the others are put in. We shot it handheld with the bags over the cameras and stuff, and it was myself and another operator, Scott Sakamoto, who's about the best operator in Hollywood. I mean, he's great. We just went in there handheld and just shot with the actors, and we'd do one magazine and come back out, and it was like 20 minutes to clean up and get ready and do another one. And I say we were really shooting in the desert under the hot sun, but it's pity. Actually, I should have asked for the next scene, which is it cuts to then a scene at night under the oil fires and the smoke, and that was all shot in the studio in Universal, stage 11 and 12 at Universal. And originally they wanted to shoot it in the desert, and I suggested that I really wanted the control over the atmosphere and stuff. So we did it on stage without any fire, because they wouldn't let us use fire, but I didn't want it. And what I did is constructed these kind of columns of bulbs to put where the oil fires would be in false perspective, obviously, to light the whole scene. So I just had these 4 columns of bulbs. They were like 500-watt mushroom bulbs on flicker generators, and all dimmed down to get an orange color. And I like 4, and then we put sand dunes on the stage, and actors did this, filled it with smoke, and again, it didn't have to be, it wasn't black smoke, so effects afterwards added a bit black smoke. We painted the cyc all around the stage as though it was a continuation of the sand dunes. Basically, it's shot in camera. Oh, and we had a horse in there, this black horse covered in oil, this really emaciated horse comes stumbling out the desert, and Jake goes up to this horse, and it's my favorite scene of the film, where he's just kind of looking at the horse eye to eye, and it's like, whoa, it's really powerful. But it was all done on stage, and I remember I went to the ASC clubhouse one time, and a very renowned cinematographer had asked me how long I'd spent in Kuwait shooting that scene. And I thought, well, no, it's great. I mean, why would he know? Thank God, that was the biggest compliment you can possibly have,
And you talked about the tungsten. You're a man who likes tungsten.
Yeah, I mean, I was always shooting tungsten stock. I found it a little bit smoother. Oh, and I forgot that. I used bleach bypass on this film as well.
Oh, yes.
But a partial bleach bypass on the negative. So it's different than 1984. Right. It's not the ACE process, but it's similar to the one that, like, right, I think Clint Eastwood uses. But you can control the amount of silver you leave in the negative to control the amount of black.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Igor, for repeating that without my prompting. I'm grateful. Thank you. So that was Jarhead, your favorite film. Sorry, that was Jarhead, your favorite film. Now, the violence which you were part of in the Coen, almost Coen brother. You became a Coen brother in a way.
For a little bit, yeah.
The third Coen brother. the opening of No Country for All Men. If you're going to have an opening of a film, you might as well have something that holds the audience, and that's one of the things that struck me particularly about Skyfall. The opening of Skyfall is, in my opinion, the best of any of the Bond films, as it happens. But before we talk about that opening, let's have a look at what we're talking about, and that is the opening of No Country for All Men, please. I noticed that after that, Benicio thanked the makeup artist or the costume designer, whoever it was responsible for the wonderful hairstyle, which
Yeah, costume designer.
costume design.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it is quite violent, isn't it? But I don't know if you've read the book, Cormac McCarthy's book. I mean, it's a mixture of this kind of melancholy kind of view of the Old West. It's almost like something Peckinpah would have loved, you know?
Okay, yes.
The feeling of the Old West and the lack of code. And then this killer comes who, is he a real person? Is he a ghost? Is he evil personified?
Yes.
So they wanted this opening. It's interesting. They wanted this opening that was this kind of beauty landscapes of Texas. So I spent with Andy Harris, my assistant, who I worked with since Fargo actually, so that's a few years. We just spent 5 or 6 days in Texas shooting that opening sequence into the landscapes. And then we went back at the end of the shoot to do the shots down there with the actors. Yeah, that was quite interesting. So it is the blend of this kind of beautiful landscape against this sort of violence. And I think what Joel and Ethan are really great at making violence so real because it happens out of nowhere. It's unexpected. Like the guy, when he gets out of the car, what is that? You know, it's just like, it's a sort of a weird thing. It's also interesting in the sheriff's office, the linoleum floor after take one got scratched and scratched and scratched, and we were kind of thinking, well, how do we get rid of the scratches because it's out of continuity? But then we go, no, it's great, it's fantastic because it shows the brutality of what was going on. And so it's all this build-up, and the other thing about that little sequence is introducing Javier's character. They didn't want to see him, so when he gets in the car, he's just a silhouette in the back of the car. You see the oxygen cylinder come in, you see the kind of elements of this character, but you don't see him until there's the crane shot, and he's holding the sheriff or the policeman, and the crane comes down on his face, and then you see it's Javier Bardem. Yeah.
That was Coen Brothers, storyboarded. But at that point in your career, you were being offered a lot of scripts. How important was it for you to read the scripts, and how many did you turn down?
Well, you know, I think it's a misnomer that you get offered that many scripts. I mean, you build up a kind of relationship with certain directors, and that's who you work with over your career, you know. And yes, I get offered scripts that I like to be offered by directors that don't have a regular cameraman, for instance. But then also, which is great, because I think new directors all the time are so interesting, and I love experimenting, and you see, I love doing different things. The ones I usually turn down, well, the ones I always turn down are Marvel Comics, but I don't like the big I don't like those sort of movies. I don't like what passes for science fiction these days. That's why really the first science fiction film I've done is Bladerunner, because I don't, you know, it's science fantasy most of what is out there and what I get offered. So, you know, I like films about characters. You see from the films I do, I like filming people, and I like stories that have some relevance to the real world. So,
yes. Is it important to have empathy with somebody in the story?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do.
In Blade Runner, where was your empathy?
Well, yeah, no, you didn't have it, but I did, you see. Because
Yeah,
I think because Ryan's character is so blank and bland,
right.
I really feel for that person. It's like a human being with no soul, searching for that. Anyway, I don't want to go on about that.
No.
Well, you know.
Not at all. No, it's very
I
interesting.
find that film very moving.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
I bet obviously it's only a few people's tastes, and I quite respect that. Not a lot of people like Stalker or Ivan's Childhood, but to me they're the greatest, two of the greatest films ever made. But there you go.
Sure, yes. I think I saw it very late at night in Wales, and I was tired. Anyway,
right.
But I stayed with it because the cinematography was absolutely outstanding. Anyway, now just talking about that aspect of taking on an animation film. You help in animation films. You've helped quite a few. We've not talked about that at all, but tell us how you came about that.
I first did that when Pixar were making that film WALL-E.
Oh yes.
They wanted it to feel like a live-action movie. So I spent not a lot of time. I spent quite a bit of time at Pixar. did a lighting demonstration and stuff like that there, and then talked to their animators and lighters and that. And I basically spent time on the first 20 minutes, I suppose, the opening sequence on planet Earth with all the trash. So I did that, and then I got asked to do, you know, other movies. I worked with Gore Verbinski on Rango, on the lighting of that, and recently I've been working with DreamWorks on the How to Train Your Dragon series. I'm working on the third one of that at the moment. It's great for me because, I mean, I go up there when I'm in LA and I do it personally, but when I'm away, like, I've got a remote connection and they send me images and they send me the lighting they do, and then I make notes or Photoshop something and go back and forth. And so it's great for me.
Excellent. Where do we end up? We ended up with, for the moment, the last of the Coen films we're going to screen here this evening, this afternoon rather. See, it feels like evening. Then you came across a director came across you called Andrew Dominic.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I don't know, I forget how that came about actually. I forget how they came about, but I you know, I kind of knew that film was in the offing, I think, and I read the book, I believe. And again, you know, by that time I'd done like a couple of what I consider westerns, but to do something like that was like, whoa, you know, great. I mean, that's another of my all-time favorites.
I think that applies to everybody, Jesse James. You have to wait a long time for the assassination, was my only complaint. Anyway, there we are. That's life. Okay, so
I like films, you know, the film similar to Jesse James in a way for me was Kundun, which is almost like a visual tone poem. You know, it's not a strict linear narrative, and the use of voiceover in Jesse James, a lot of people reacted against, and that feeling of it being like a almost something off the History Channel, somebody said, and I think, well, it is, yes, but there's so many ways of making a movie. Why is that necessarily wrong? I still find it very evocative of the period and of the character, you know.
did you ever read westerns as a child?
No, but I love Sam Peckinpah movies. So,
Okay, yes.
you know, I would have loved to have worked with Sam Peckinpah. I mean, I think he was one of the greatest directors ever. And Sergio Leone, actually.
And you had Tommy Lee Jones and Sam Shepard in that?
Yeah, Tommy Lee Jones is fantastic. He wasn't in, it was in No Country, but
Oh,
he
that was
wasn't
No
in
Country. Oh,
Jesse,
okay.
Jesse James was Brad Pitt.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes, that's Brad. I know it was Brad, yes.
He was great.
Yeah, sure, good. All right, so we'll have a look at that, please. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford.
actually, it was one of the toughest films I've been on, I think, and really, because I think what we were trying to do was really quite difficult, but I think it's one of the most successful in the end. We shot a longer film than actually has been released, which is a shame. The first cut was nearly 4 hours, and there's a whole number. What I love about it is, well, the studio said this, why does it go on after Jesse James is killed? But the whole thing about the film and the book was like the study of what happens to the characters and how their lives change, and the new society coming and how they dealt with it, you know, and the fact that the Sam Shepard character, his brother, ended up on a farm in New England, and he would show tourists around his farm. He would take money for tourism, you know, and that's how some of these old outlaws actually ended up in that later life. But that wasn't in the final film, which is a shame, I think, because I found that all interesting. They said the film was too long, and you didn't get enough people because the film was too long. Well, why not keep it as a longer film that was shot, and you still won't get the audience, but at least that's the film we shot, yeah.
Yes. So, following the relative success of that film... Microphone? Sorry, I beg your pardon. Following the success of that film, your relationship with Sam Mendes was reignited by one of the most exciting films that you've been asked to shoot, I would imagine.
Well, I did Revolutionary Road with him,
yes.
between Jarhead and Skyfall. You know, it's kind of funny because Sam called me up in that about doing a Bond movie, and he said, the first thing he said was, don't put the phone down. Was it, we were in Australia, right?
No, I think we were in
Oh, were we? Anyway, I remember then he said, wait, I'll be in LA, let's talk. And we went for a walk on the beach in Santa Monica. And he said, it's a Bond movie, but I want to do something a little different. It's going to be about character, and he described what he wanted to do. And yeah, I thought, well, why not? Great. But for me, it wasn't because it's a Bond movie. I'm not a particular fan of Bond movies. But, you know, I'm a fan of Sam, and it was, you know, it was another film. It was another script, and it was very much a piece by itself in my mind, you know. But yes, sure, I haven't done anything really like that with that much action, and the way you have to shoot those films is quite different than most, you know.
Has anybody, any questions about, particularly the Jesse James scene I should have asked at the end of it, particularly about that, or about the making of the Bond film? My friend from India.
So I want to ask you about your color palettes, because all of your films have a very specific color palette, but they're also very different from each other. So what is your process in, like, do you select a palette, or what is your process in choosing the color palette for the film?
There's no overall process. No, I just do it scene by scene, and kind of it just strikes me that, you know, the interior of the carriages should be that kind of golden kind of colour, but no, it's just a sort of instinctive reaction to the script and the scene, really, from one to another, yeah. Nothing overall.
Do you plan that in advance, like according to the story, because it's so different in all your films?
Which one, sorry?
Your style is so different in all your films, and but it's also very coherent. Like, it's not, there are no colors that are somehow just not fitting at all. And
well, I suppose, I mean, I tend towards naturalism, even doing something like, well, Skyfall or Bladerunner. I mean, I still wanted it to feel like it could be, it's a possible world. It's naturalistic in that sense. You know, in Bladerunner, then he said, well, he felt that Las Vegas could be red, deeply red. And you think, well, you kind of still want to make that feel like it's a naturalistic red. I mean, I suppose, you know, where I come from, my background and everything, it's much more about naturalism than stylization. So, I mean, I have fun when, like, the man who wasn't there, it's fun to stylize things, but I always have that feeling that, you know, you want the audience to believe in the reality you're creating. You don't want anything to stand out. I mean, I feel that, well, I'm rambling now, but I feel that about color, but I also feel about camera moves. That, you know, sometimes a camera move or a composition can be really beautiful, and, you know, but does it fit? Sometimes it's better to keep things ugly and rough. Like I was saying about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? I wouldn't want it now to be any slicker than it was when it was made. The roughness is kind of good. And the only thing I might have taken out was some of the wobbles in the crane shot, but that was because we put railway sleepers over the down for this Keeler crane. It's a 75-foot crane, right? And it's in this bayou, and the railway sleepers was running the track on. It was all sinking into the mud, and the guys were trying to dig it out, and they were getting bitten by crawfish, which were in the mud, right? It was like chaos. So the whole thing was starting to go over like that, and the guys were going, one more take, we need one more take, and so the camera's going, but you know, what do you do?
On that film, I understand you had one of the most difficult shots you've ever had. That was a dog in the water, which we haven't shown, but it may be interesting to know why that was so difficult, wasn't it?
Well, it wasn't for me, because it was CG, but it was quite difficult, yeah.
Oh, okay.
No, we shot references. No, I don't know where you got that from. No, because at the end, yeah, there's the flood, and the dogs, and you know what I mean, and oh brother, yeah, and the dog's sinking down. Well, we shot references, but there's a bit of CG work in there, yeah.
Sorry,
I
could I ask a question?
Sorry?
Sorry?
Somebody
Oh,
said?
sorry.
Maybe my question was, what do you find is better for your creativity? A set like Jesse James where you're more limited to working on location, maybe more with natural light, or a set like Bladerunner where you can probably try out many more different things? What do you find is better for your creativity? More limited sets or sets where you have free reign?
But it's the same as like whether you're doing a film handheld or you're doing it on, you know, Libra crane, you know, Libra heads and all the latest technology. It's like each to its. It's about the script and the interpretation of that, the director's sort of interpretation of the script. I like it either way. I like going from one to another. Like, you know, a big movie's no more of a challenge than a small movie in a sense, because your expectations and ambitions are still relative to that budget and that script are always higher. You know what I mean?
I suppose lighting is lighting and good composition is good composition, no matter what you're doing it on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, sorry.
No.
Anyway, okay, so we're going to go Skyfall. We're going to see Skyfall. Tell us about the scene before we show it. Tell us about the scene that we're going to show.
Oh, it's in the skyscraper. Yeah, I mean, we scouted Shanghai. We were going to shoot in Shanghai, and I went out there by myself because they'd scouted out before I was on, and I went to see what they were suggesting in Shanghai, where they were going to shoot this scene, which is on the 55th floor of a tower block, and I suggested that was a little bit unrealistic because so much had to be done outside the window. And what happened was one of the sets, we were going to shoot on a back lot and on a studio in Shanghai. There was this big casino, standing casino, but a hurricane or typhoon out there came in and blew it down. So we had to shoot that back in Pinewood. So thankfully I said, okay, let's do that tower block, the interior in Pinewood on the 007 stage, which was then one of the biggest in the world or whatever. And so, yeah, I talked to Dennis Gassner, who was a designer, and gradually we whittled it down and said, well, we're doing it on a stage, so now why don't we make it all glass? Because originally it would have just been a building with a window. And so it just evolved into this. And we built a little model about 4 times the size of this table and put in computer screens where I wanted to put, you know, playback commercials on big wall screens. And so we developed the set like that, and we put in the glass partitions and figured the sort of how it would all work in terms of reflections and stuff. So it was a lot of fun. So it went from being something you're shooting on location to this huge studio set, but it ended up still being cheaper because, you had so much control, and we could shoot it so much quicker, and you know, you weren't rigging 50 odd floors up.
Have a look at that, please.
street down below, and obviously when the guy falls down below, that's CG. And the cars and the traffic down below is CG, but everything else is in camera. Oh, and a bit of the glass falling away is CG, because that would have been too dangerous. But otherwise, it's sort of in camera. And the set was built, you know, high enough up that you could shoot the hotel across the way and still have the, you know, fill the frame and stuff. It was fun.
I suspect that'll be an iconic film in future film history. Myself, probably I made it wrong. Anyway, so that was the end of. Of course, nobody had ever won an Oscar and nobody probably ever will for working on a Bond movie. But you enjoyed the experience.
Oh yeah, we had a great time. Yeah, it was very long, and we it was mainly in England, but we shot quite a lot in Turkey, especially for that opening sequence. And yeah, it was fun. It had its moments, but they all do.
Right. Well, we've done pretty well for time. We're doing well for time. We haven't come to the end yet. We had to drop 2 scenes because of time, and I think we've probably made the right decision. But there's one more film which we're going to show, which is, it's interesting because a friend of mine who was in the British SAS during the, he happened to be passing my window at the time I was watching this film. This is a true story. And I said, come and have a look at this. He was, he had a high up rank in the SAS, the British security system, in Northern Ireland. And he said, Sicario, that is my favorite film because that is about borders, and that's what I was involved with. And it was very interesting to hear him relate completely to the reality of his situation in what you've shot. So tell us about making it.
Well, again, I'd spent a long time in prep with Denny, just storyboarding it and talking him through the scenes. You know, he is somebody that was kind of nice to sit down and really go through the script and figure really where maybe you can cut dialogue, where you can just use images and, you know, condense it, and so you've got more time for the images and the characters just to be able to study the characters without having endless yap. So we spent a lot of time doing that, so we had a really good plan. The problem we had was it wasn't a huge budget, and the problem we had was finding somewhere where to stand in for Mexico, for the border, you know, not only for going across the border, but for actually being in Mexico, which, you know, everybody was saying was so expensive. And I can remember one production meeting in the end saying, you know, we were all sitting there and saying, well, I'm sorry, but it's Mexico, isn't it? We have to shoot in Mexico. And bless them, the producers said, okay, we'll shoot in Mexico. And we went to Mexico City and said, if you can do it in a week, basically, it can't be there for more than a week. Time you go in, get it prepped and shoot it and get out. And so, yeah, you know, because there was no alternative really. How do you recreate such a vast kind of landscape? And it was, you know, that Mexico was really a character in the film. It was this piece. It was this kind of like, well, just, you know, to Emily's character, that Mexico was like kind of this big thing over there that had to be quite dramatic and in order to make the story work. So, you know, it's always like that. You argue for certain things that you know that are key to making it, you know, so you get together with the director and you kind of gang up against the producer. But then you have to give some other things you have to give, you know. I shot a lot of the car stuff, a lot of the car stuff at night. I shot it on stage because, you know, it would just save money from being out on the road trying to shoot it at night on a road, you know, night shooting being much more expensive. Not that the night shoot is more expensive, but then you have to have a turnaround day and you know, then it all adds up. So, you know, you fight your battles where you really feel it's going to count.
I meant to introduce that by saying that was your first collaboration, which is a word I haven't used yet, collaboration. No. We all collaborate all the time. With Denis Villeneuve. No, I did Prisoners before that. I meant that. I meant to say that I was going to introduce the Prisoners, which we've dropped, and say that. I beg your pardon. Yes. How is a Canadian, obviously very talented, somebody you obviously like working with very much, gives you a lot of freedom?
Well, I think we sort of have similar kind of attitude really to things, you know, similar view of filmmaking and film and what it can do, and with similar, in many ways. I was very lucky meeting Denis because actually it happened. I'd seen one of his film Incendie that he made, and I was very lucky. The Academy, they have these events for the foreign film directors, what they call foreign film directors. So they have this little soiree, and I was asked to introduce Denny and his film at this event. So that's the first time I met him, and I said to my agent, if he ever does a film in the States, can I put my name in the hat? And luckily he did, and it was Prisoners. So yeah, I was very lucky to tie up with him.
Is there anything in the future with him? Have you got anything?
I'm doing a film with Sam Mendes, and he's doing another film that I won't be able to do.
Right, okay, you won't be able to do. Now, you're mentioned in a film called Goldfinch. Has that happened, or is it?
Yeah, we shot that last winter, but it won't be out till next year.
Okay.
They're still in post.
Is that, who was directing that?
That was a guy called John Crowley,
Okay.
who did a film called Brooklyn a couple of years ago.
All right, yes.
Irishman, lovely guy.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about it at all?
Well, it's based on a best-selling book called Goldfinch.
Right.
Really, it's set in two time frames. It's about this kid with these kind of abusive parents, and just sees him in his childhood, and then sees him later life, and
Yes.
just how it connects.
And you must, over your career, you must have been disappointed at the reaction. I know Kundun with Martin Scorsese was a very beautiful film, but was killed.
Well, I think because of the Chinese connection, I think it wasn't given it the kind of release and the publicity it should have had, really. But you know, it's it's a film that it's not a linear narrative in that way. It's a kind of piece of poetry, really. The script was. It's not everybody's sensibility, but I kind of think it's one of Marty's best films myself.
Yes.
Certainly one of the most, not experimental, but one of the most adventurous in terms of its style and its tone, you know. Yeah, but you know, yeah. It's not everybody's, you know, not what everybody wants to see when they go to the cinema in the evening, you know.
There must be some questions you're dying to ask. Some students have come from a long way away.
My
now,
wife, look at
the
that.
lady asking
You've got
this,
a lot of questions, I know, James.
I just want to say that the lady asking this question happens to be the lady beside the man on my right here. And we're grateful to her for bringing him here, for helping us.
What my question was, why don't you talk about, as a cinematographer, you not only prep, but what's really important is when you're on the set and something doesn't go well, or something is unexpected, finding that, catching that opportunity. Okay. Why don't you talk about how, as a cinematographer, part of what you do is prep and prepare for everything. But what's really important is when you're on the set and something unexpected happens or unfortunate happens, but you see an opportunity to do something different. Well, for instance, Sicario with all the skies. You weren't expecting that, but that becomes part of and then the jellyfish, I noticed.
The reality of filmmaking, you've got to make things work half the time when it's not exactly what you wanted. You're right, on Sicario, when Denny and I were sitting in wherever it is, Montreal or wherever it was, thinking about the film, it was like we wanted this kind of bleached out skies with no texture and, you know, this really bald landscape, and then you get there and of course it's late summer in New Mexico and you've got these huge billowing clouds and lightning storms. Well, then you use it, you know, and actually it was great because we didn't expect the landscape to become a character like that, but it actually kind of helped the whole feel of it. But a lot of things happen like that, you know, that you get rain when you don't want it, but then you've got to make it work. The best one, well, I met my wife on a film in North Dakota called Thunderheart, and we were doing a night shoot on that, and there's this huge landscape I had to light. So I had a Musco light, which is a big 96 kilowatt kind of, it's basically a floodlight for football stadiums, but it was a huge thing. And we'd positioned this on the top of the hill to light this caravan in the foreground, and then the Badlands, the landscape going to, like 3/4 a mile probably was lit. You shoot wide open, but those things are pretty good. And but I was shooting wide open, and we were ready to do the shot, and it rained, and all the landscape went dark because it all was wet, right? So I talked to the AD. I said, I think we better break for lunch, at night. So it was about 11 o'clock. So we broke early, and I came back early after lunch and looked at it, and I went to my gaffer and said, the generator's broken down. He said, no, it's not. I said, the generator's broken down. And then the camera suddenly was a camera problem, and I had to do all these things to stall until the landscape was dried out enough that I had an exposure. So, there's a lot of things you do,
Question at the back from my friend who's just arrived from Greece. Yanis, welcome. You got a question? Could you get a microphone in, please?
Well, thank you. I'm Yannis Daskalothanasis from Greece, and you're my favorite cinematographers, and I get inspiration from you. And, well, that's an opportunity to put a question. Nowadays, photography and cinematography is more manipulated in post-production due to the techniques we use and due to the evolution of photography, of the technology, let's say. How much do you accept in your work? Which is the percentage that you put in post-production and real photography on your work? I mean, you say there is a limit I can accept, I prefer to shoot it naturally, or you say, okay, this we do it in post-production. Where is the limit? It's different from before, from 20 years ago.
But it's different from film to film, because the limit can be on, if you don't have the money for 1,000 extras, then you use CG. I mean, and if it's only one shot as opposed to doing a whole scene. I mean, going back to 1984, I mean, it's all in camera, but all those extras are in camera. So No, I mean, that relates to it though, because as long as the photography, which can be CG, some of it is CG, but it's based on a real image, an in-camera image, as long as that's true to the script and a reality you're trying to create, I think the only danger is, or not the only danger, but the main danger with CG work, computer work, is that you can do anything. It's the same as like when a Steadicam came along, or remote heads were invented. The camera's doing all this. You're tracking down with a bomb from a plane and craning across the Pacific and all this rubbish. I mean, that then takes you out of reality completely. But it's the technology, the tail wagging the dog, isn't it? The technology ruling the shot, rather than the filmmaker saying, no, this is the reality we want. Just logistically, we have to use CG because we can't afford those characters, or we can't afford to build, I don't know, a castle on a hill up there in the back of this landscape. You know what I mean? So I think it is that balance, I mean, what in Skyfall there, I mean, I much prefer the idea of doing that scene in the glass rooms with real projection on set. I mean, again, that was suggested it would be all CG. And I said, well, how are you going to get the reflections, the interaction, the bouncing, the odd things that happen, So I was really, I put my foot down on that one, really. I would have quit over that one. And we had to schedule that scene around the availability of the playback screen, which was being used for some rock concerts. And it just had a window of like a week. and they had to come in and put the screen up, and we tested it, and then we had to shoot the thing, and then I had to go away the next day, even before the editor had studied what we'd shot to make sure we had everything we needed. So, you know, it's logistics as well as creative kind of, isn't it? Yeah.
I'll just pitch up my voice.
1 second, don't hold it, because although you might hear yourself, half the people can't hear you.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Very interesting to hear about the documentary and how you started off making documentaries and then moving into drama. Just interesting, do you ever have a craving to go back to documentary? And if you did, how would you approach it? Would you go back to a skeleton crew of yourself, or would you take some lessons from drama and then take them towards a documentary?
No, I mean, I romanticize about going back to what I did before, but I'm probably, it's just a romanticization nowadays, really. I mean, the kind of work I did, I don't think I could do now. But, you know, I started in documentaries, but when I was at film school, I shot 15 student films for other people, and they were all dramas. And that was my kind of calling card when I left film school to companies where I was looking for work. I sort of chose to shoot documentaries for a number of years because, well, for two reasons, really. I thought it was, it's kind of, at that time, it's probably what I loved more about movie making, but I also thought that was a very good way for me to experience life, in a way. I got to travel quite a bit and get places where I'd never been, and I think it helped my confidence. When I first left film school, I did one feature film that was like a horror movie, and just that experience, I thought, well, I need to get more confidence. So in a way, I think working on documentaries helped me no end in that way, you know.
Hello, everybody. I'm from Slovenia, cinematographer, and now I have in my mind your film Read the Reader.
Yeah.
You're cooperating with Chris Mendes. Could you tell us how did you cooperate with him?
Well, no, that was, I mean, to be honest about that, that wasn't intended at all. What happened on that film is I prepped it and shot for, I don't know, I was shooting 5-6 weeks, I think. And then they didn't have a leading actress. Or the leading actress actually dropped out or wasn't available or whatever. It never actually happened. So then the film shut down. And I left to do another film. I did a film called Doubt with the same producer in New York. And then The Reader started up again intermittently. I was talking to Chris about it, but intermittently they shot a little bit of stuff at Christmas, and then it didn't really start shooting probably again till early the next summer. So it was shut down for like 6 months. So that it wasn't an intentional thing, you know.
To your right.
How much control you have over the final image of visual effects heavy films, like for example Bladerunner? How much you're involved in the final look, in the final result?
Well, I didn't shoot anything last year in the summer. I was completely involved in the effects and the post on Blade Runner. And I'll mention this, I've got to thank the producers on that, because they said that I would have, nothing would be finalized till I gave it my approval. So I was very involved in it all. It would be interesting, but it would take a lot of time to go through all of that and show you what is actually CG and what is actually in camera. Because sometimes you'll be surprised what's in camera, and sometimes you'll be surprised what's CG. And again, back to the question before, I think it's all about intent and about the most practical way of getting that image that you have in your head, you know, the intention of the scene, of the image. It's not just about, oh, we'll do that because it's possible to do it in CG. Sometimes you get you know, so many added things by doing something live in camera. Just the way, way light interacts with a surface or bounces back 2 or 3 times. I learned this a lot from doing animated films, that the technology's great, and you look at these characters and they could create things that are really naturalistic, but they don't do all the subtleties of real life. So it's a trade-off.
Would you ever get your hands dirty with technology if it gets into a point that you can interact with it? Like, would you do it on a live shoot?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
Would you touch on a technology that will allow you to do CG work the way you would do on live sets?
Well, it's interesting because in the animation now you have this process camera capture, where you basically walk around a virtual set. You just have a big space and walk around a virtual set with the set. And as you walk through that set, like a virtual reality experience, I suppose. And then you have the actors, and you can actually create the shot and alter the blocking at the same time. So that is kind of what you're talking about. And I kind of think, I'm probably sad to say that I think a lot more films in the future will be done that way, that you won't need the physical presence of an actor on a set. I mean, it's happening more and more. I mean, there's action scenes where the actors aren't there. They're just totally pasted into an environment, aren't they,
Well, there's a question from Christian Berger, a distinguished cinematographer, generous cinematographer in his own right, who spent a lot of his time now giving something back to students and young cinema makers.
Yeah, and that's why, Roger, I would like to ask you if you could make a kind of summary from your point of view, your very subjective position toward all the hypes we live permanent in our job, and toward the tools in general.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite getting the question about the...
Your personal view and your personal point of view on how you handle the permanent changing hypes from technology,
right,
and your position toward tools.
Yeah.
And because we speak permanent about tools, more or less.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've always got to keep abreast of the technology, what's out there, but you've got to be careful, like I was saying before, it doesn't kind of rule what you do. Just because you can do something with a camera or with a light doesn't mean, say, you should do that, I'm a very simple person. I mean, the way I shoot and everything, sometimes it might not look it, but I always try and find the simplest way of getting to where I feel it wants to go, So it's just a matter of being careful in the choice of equipment, and I say about Steadicam, and when it came out, everybody was using it, and at one point everybody was using zoom lenses, weren't they? And it's just like becomes a fad, and it's not really connected to the story necessarily, So yeah.
Artistically, because when I hear you speaking this afternoon, you remind me very often on Sven Nykvist, and this is a compliment.
On who?
On Sven Nykvist.
Sven, yeah.
It's a compliment, by the way.
I'm sure, absolutely.
Because it's true that what you said with simplicity, mastership is always a kind of simplicity, or to direct our attention to the right points, or to the right thing. And you're really a master for that, and we were not speaking at all about how clean your frames are. Clean in the sense of not clinical, of course, but do not give wrong informations.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think that comes from my love of still photography. I think the greatest still photographers kind of hone in on something that's very simple composition, like Alex Webb. You look at some of his images and there's like a complexity to the image, but there's also a simplicity in the nature of it and what it's trying to focus on. And I think there's a danger of making things too complicated, and it's like eye candy. It's not going to the point of what you want. There was a very interesting thing when we were doing Fargo with Joel and Ethan Coen. We would be looking for these locations, and we went around all these different hotels. And the production designer, who's a really great production designer, but we would go into this hotel, and you'd think this is really kind of bland, boring hotel, And the Coens, they kind of look around and kind of chew, and Ethan would say, no, and Joel went, no, it's too interesting. And we said, what's interesting about it? It's a bland wall and nothing. And you know, and that's always struck with me, that sometimes you want to whittle it down to something as minimal as possible. And I believe that about lighting as well. You can overcomplicate things and put too much in there, you know. Yeah.
I think Confucius must have foreseen the coming of cinematography when he said quite simply that life is simple enough, why make it complicated?
Yeah.
So we've got a
There
question
was a number of things on Blade Runner when the effects, where they were doing the effect. We wanted the Blade Runner to be this kind of really bland, grey, lifeless world. And a number of times effects guys, because there was effects houses all over the world that were doing some of these shots, a number of the times they said, but that's boring. So we put a sun in the sky and we put light reflecting off the water on the ground. And Denny and I going, oh my God, you know, how many more times? There's no sun in the sky, there's no clouds, there's no sun reflection on the water. You know what I mean? It's like, but they thought it was prettier, but it wasn't right. So you really got to be careful that, you know, that you don't get carried away by something that appears, you know, to be nice to look at, but it's not right.
She writes, hi, you mentioned your admiration for Stalker.
Soccer? Football?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm very interested in how do you incorporate different, like how do you get inspired by different styles than yours, because that is much more expressive and symbolic, and when you use expressiveness and symbolics in your film, they're very grounded in reality. So I'm interested in how you get inspired by that and you incorporate in your style. And another short question would be the last shot in Barton Fink with the seagull. Was that a lucky shot or was there witchcraft involved?
It was a pelican and it was very lucky.
Very lucky.
Yeah, there was no CG in Barton Fink. No, you know, Stalker or Solaris or Ivan's Childhood is probably one of my favorite films, or, you know, any films I could mention. I mean, how do you bring it in? I don't know that you do. It's just another experience. Like, you know, I go fishing and experience the ocean and the way it changes, and clouds and sunlight, and, you know, or you go to an art gallery and you look at paintings. It's all part of that experience that makes you see the way you do, I guess. I don't consciously, I mean, I think Stalker I watch every couple of years probably, and Ivan's Childhood probably every year. But it's not something that I kind of go, oh, I'm going to use that. Or it's just something that you kind of, a part of you really, which is the wonderful thing about great movies like that, isn't it, really?
Can I? You mentioned that you've seen a Denis Villeneuve film before you collaborated with him on Prisoners. So I was wondering if there is a director that you haven't worked with yet and you would really want to, or maybe someone from the past that you wish you had worked with?
Well, yeah, Sam Peckinpah. It might not have been the easiest relationship, but it would have been very fulfilling, I think. No, you know, I mean, there's a number of directors, but I'm not going to mention anyone particular because I'd leave others out. But, you know, I'd be just incredibly lucky to work with the people I have worked with, so, you know.
Question? Is that gentleman that want to ask a question? No, one over here.
Very briefly, any book recommendations other than 1984?
Any book?
Book recommendations other than 1984.
Book recommendations, yeah. Well, that would start me now. Well, anything by Cormac McCarthy, I think, you know.
Off the top of your head?
Cormac McCarthy, anything by him, but I've kind of completely blanked out. I mean, my favourite author at the moment is Richard Flanagan, who's from Tasmania. He wrote a book, The Narrow Road to the Deep North. He wrote what was the other one I really loved? Gould's Book of Fish, which is a funny title, but it's about prison in Tasmania in early 19th century. And there's another one called, damn, what's it called? Oh, anyway, look him up, Flanagan. and his books. There's one he wrote that is it's wonderful. It's about the connection between Sir John Franklin, who searched for the Northwest Passage, and Charles Dickens, and it's beautifully researched. It's all historical. It's about their relationship. It's really interesting. It's a great book, and I forgot the title now. Okay.
Just hello. I was just wondering, do you have any kind of formula of, because you gave this example of this film that before Brother Coens, that you had this director that wanted these zoom lenses and stuff that you are not really keen on. And do you have any kind of formula of communicating? Because, for instance, Skyfall, you have to communicate with 200 people under and around you and the director. And how do you cope with all this situation if it's really going not the way you really think it's going?
I don't know. I find it's harder since I gave up smoking years ago. Yeah, and I don't do drugs. I don't know. It's kind of difficult sometimes. I mean, I get very nervous. I do, very nervous. But it's part of the job. I mean, it's as much part of the job as actually, you know, pointing the camera, framing it, you know, just dealing with people. I mean, I've worked with the same people for many years, like Andy Harris, my assistant. I've worked since Fargo with him. That's 20 years or so, something. I've worked with only 3 gaffers in the United States. The guy that was gaffer on main gaffer from America, there was a great Hungarian gaffer as well, but the main gaffer from America was the same guy who I met on Sid and Nancy when I first went to the States shooting. And so there's a continuity of people. So the gaffer I worked with in England, who I'm about to work with again in the new year, did 1984, and that was, for both of us, the first studio film. That was the first film he was gaffer on, in fact. And we used brute arcs, you know, the old brute arcs, and neither of us had used one prior to that film. So, you know, we learned together. So there's a whole history I have with people I work with, which makes it much more kind of comfortable, you know. So that's a big way of coping. Back to the zoom lens thing, though. I just don't like having a zoom lens on the camera and saying, oh, we'll be here, or now zoom out and now we'll do a wide shot. I like having to change from lens to lens, because it focuses you on why am I on a 32 and why am I now going on a 50. You know, it makes you think about the lens length as well as the composition, because the audience's reaction to seeing a shot on a long lens out here to a wide lens here is very different. It's a very different perspective you're giving the audience. So I like that kind of discipline. But on the other hand, like I did a film like The Village with M. Night Shyamalan, and we storyboarded, again, I only worked with him that time, but we storyboarded the whole film, and we very deliberately storyboarded shots that were on a zoom lens, you know, and so for those shots we used a zoom lens. So, and there's shots in 1984 that are very deliberately on a zoom lens. But it was to get the effect of a zoom lens, which is like somebody's concentration going on part of the frame. You know what I mean? It's like you're zooming into a picture, not like you're tracking into a world.
Thank you.
Can I? Sorry. Hello. How long do you prepare for the film? Because in all of your movies you can see the continuity of your light, and for how long do you think about the movie? How long do you prepare for that? Do you read it like months in advance and prepare for that? And after that, how often do you get excited about the thing you did? Do you get excited because of all of your experience you have now? When you finish your work, do you get excited about it, or you said, okay, that was what I wanted, what was my intent, what I intended to do? So,
I never get excited after it because it's never exactly what I intended. I get relieved when I look at something and think, well, it wasn't so bad. Or when other people say, well, that was good. I go, oh, well, that's okay. I hid that bit. I get excited about films as soon as I read a script, if I know I'm going to be offered it, I get obsessed about it. Like, I'm starting to work on a film now that doesn't shoot till next April, and I'm going to be obsessed about that. I mean, I kind of, in the middle of the night, I'm waking up thinking, how the hell could you, whatever. And so, yeah, I think about things a lot. Sometimes I don't have enough prep as I want, but, you know, I used to go from film to film a bit more than I do now. And I remember coming back from, I think it was coming back from Kundun to do The Man Who Wasn't There, wasn't it? And we had, like, I think 5 weeks between one and the other, and that was too short for me. But, so it was a lot of hard work. I like a longer prep period. I mean, even, you know, I don't like storyboard and everything. It depends on the director, but I like that thought time. I like time to go through the script with the director and just gradually, you know, formulate a way of seeing it, you know.
Do you break down? Do you break down the scenes? Break down the light before you start shooting? Do you already have in mind everything, like during the film, or it's something, you know what
I mean, on Bladerunner, I do diagrams. I mean, for Bladerunner, there's, on Bladerunner, I did them all on a computer. My wife did most of them, you know, some of the drawing. I had a diagram for every set, and I had it all laid out, so I could give that to Christian, the Hungarian gaffer, and I could give something to Billy, who would then go and prep the next scene, and so everybody had a real game plan, and the rigger knew where he needed to put stuff. So, I mean, some people used to work more than now, probably, where a gaffer would just put up a whole rig, a whole grid, and a whole load of lights, and then there was always a light there. If the DP or the cinematographer wanted a light there or there, it was always there. But I'm very specific about what I want and how I'm going to light something. And sometimes, you know, Billy or somebody has said to me, "Are you sure you don't want something up there?" And I say, "No, all I need is one little lamp bouncing off a card in the corner. I'm going to have a practical light, and that will be it." You know what I mean? So I like to think everything through. And, you know, sometimes, obviously, you change your mind nearer the shoot date or something evolves. But usually it was partly, I suppose, when I was starting off, thinking, you know, a lot of people would criticize me for trying to operate as well as light. And they say, well, how can you possibly do both? So I've always been aware of that kind of liability in a way. So I've always been very prepared in terms of lighting and having a plan so that I can concentrate. On the day, I'll concentrate on the camera and not the lighting.
And what's the percent of improvisation on set? Is there any improvisation?
Oh, yeah. What, in the lighting? Well, I mean, you know, if I was doing this, I might put a rig up to mimic the light coming from the screen to the audience, and maybe I wouldn't do anything else on the shoot day, or maybe if I was on a close-up, I might diffuse it, change it around a bit. Yeah, no, again, it depends on the situation. I mean, often with the Coen brothers, you've got it storyboarded, and you know on the day you've got however many shots to shoot and how much time to doing it in. And that, in a way, then you kind of have to light for that day. You can't just say, well, I want all these options, and it's going to take me an hour to do this shot. Well, you won't get all the shots. So, you know, you have to compromise. Everything you do is a compromise, and that's probably why I've never been that happy with something I've shot the day after or the week after. But then later on, you forget how much you had to compromise, and you think, well, that's not so bad.
I used to have a gaffer who, when things went wrong, used to go around saying PPPPP, which stood for proper preparation prevents piss poor production.
That's very good. That's really good.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time. My friend Dora at the back, who is responsible for very much of what's happening here today, was.
Oh, okay.
I'd like to just conclude by thanking you all for coming. This is the most complete audience we've had in many years, and you've come, many of you, a long way. I hope it's been worthwhile, and that you come again next year. The next year is the 40th anniversary of Manaki. That's going to be important. It's going to be even, it can't be more special than having Roger here, but it'll be, we'll do our best to make it worthwhile, given everything else. There are many people I have to thank, and they're particularly upstairs. We've got Igor and Nikki, and they...